The cold morning air hit Josiah Crane like a slap as he stepped out of his weathered farmhouse. Coffee steam rising from his chipped mug. 37 years of ranching had taught him to read the land like scripture. And something felt wrong. The silence was too complete, too empty. His boots crunched across the frost-covered ground toward the barn, each step echoing his growing unease. Thunder, his prized Appaloosa stallion worth more than his truck and trailer combined, should have been nickering for breakfast by now. The horse's routine was as predictable as sunrise, a greeting whinny, impatient stomping, then the demanding snort that meant "Where's my grain?" But the barn was silent. Josiah's weathered hand trembled slightly as he pulled open the heavy wooden door. The familiar smell of hay and leather filled his nostrils, but something was different. Thunder's stall stood empty, the gate hanging open like a gaping wound. Fresh straw was scattered across the floor, and his prized stallion was nowhere to be seen. But there, curled up in the far corner of the stall where Thunder should have been, lay a boy. The child couldn't have been more than 12, his clothes dirty and torn, dark hair matted against his head. He slept with the deep exhaustion of someone who had traveled far and hard. His small frame was wrapped around a battered backpack, clutching it like a lifeline even in sleep. Josiah's first instinct was anger. Horse thieves were the lowest form of vermin, and if this kid was involved in Thunder's disappearance, there would be hell to pay. But as he looked closer, something made him pause. The boy's face was gaunt, cheekbones sharp with hunger. His clothes were too thin for the October chill, and his shoes were held together with duct tape. "Hey!" Josiah called out, his voice rougher than intended. "Hey, kid!" The boy's eyes snapped open, startling green eyes that held too much wariness for someone so young. He scrambled backward against the stall wall, clutching his pack tighter. "Where's my horse?" Josiah demanded, stepping closer. "That stallion is worth $15,000, and if I didn't take him," the boy interrupted, his voice barely above a whisper. "He was already gone when I got here." Josiah studied the kid's face, looking for tells, for the subtle signs of deception he'd learned to spot in horse trading. But those green eyes held nothing but exhaustion and fear, no guilt, no shifty glances. "Then, what are you doing in his stall?" The boy's chin lifted with a pride that seemed incongruous with his bedraggled appearance. "I was cold and tired. I didn't think anyone would mind if I just slept here for a while." "Anyone would mind," Josiah snapped, but his heart wasn't in it. The kid looked like he hadn't eaten in days. "Where are your parents?" Something flickered across the boy's face. Pain, loss, something deep and raw. "Don't have any, not anymore." The admission hung in the air between them, heavy with implications. Josiah felt his anger deflating like a punctured balloon. He'd seen plenty of hard luck stories in his time, but there was something about this kid that cut through his usual cynicism. "What's your name, son?" "Beckett," the boy said quietly. "Beckett River." Thunder was still missing, and Josiah had a ranch to run. But looking at this skinny kid with the old eyes and the proud chin, he realized his morning had just gotten a lot more complicated than a missing horse. "Come on then," Josiah said, surprising himself. "Can't have you solving mysteries on an empty stomach." Beckett's eyes widened with suspicion. "You're not calling the cops, should I be?" Josiah countered, but he was already walking toward the barn door. "You hungry or not?" The boy's stomach answered with a growl that could have woken the dead. Despite himself, Beckett scrambled to his feet and followed, his movements quick and cautious like a feral cat accepting food from a stranger. Inside the farmhouse kitchen, Josiah watched the kid devour eggs, bacon, and toast with the desperation of someone who hadn't seen a real meal in weeks. Beckett tried to eat slowly at first, maintaining some semblance of dignity, but hunger won out. He cleaned his plate and looked longingly at the pan. "More," Josiah offered, already reaching for another egg. "I can work for it," Beckett said quickly. "I'm good with animals, and I can fix things. We'll see about that." Josiah refilled the boy's plate, studying him over his coffee cup. "First, tell me about Thunder." "My horse, big Appaloosa with a white blanket and black spots." "You really didn't see him?" Beckett shook his head, pausing mid-bite. "When I got here last night, the barn was empty except for that old mare in the other stall." But he hesitated, then continued. I heard something, round midnight. Sounded like hoof beats, and maybe a truck. Josiah's blood chilled. A truck. Yeah, diesel engine. I think. Idled for maybe 10 minutes, then drove off toward the main road. Horse thieves, professional ones, by the sound of it. Josiah's jaw tightened. Thunder wasn't just valuable, he was irreplaceable. The stallion had been bred from championship bloodlines. And more than that, he'd been Josiah's companion for 8 years. The horse had personality, intelligence, a way of reading people that was almost supernatural. Why didn't you say something? Try to stop them? Beckett gave him a look that suggested the question was stupid. I'm 12 years old and weigh, maybe, 90 pounds. What was I supposed to do against grown men with a truck? Fair point. So you just went to sleep. I was exhausted, Beckett admitted. I've been walking for 3 days, haven't really slept since. He trailed off, but Josiah caught the pain that flashed across his young face. Since what? The boy's walls went back up instantly. Nothing, doesn't matter. Josiah didn't push. He recognized trauma when he saw it, and the kid was carrying enough baggage for someone twice his age. Instead, he reached for the phone. I need to call the sheriff about Thunder. Wait. Beckett's voice was sharp with panic. You don't have to involve the police. I told you. I didn't. Not about you, son. About my horse. Sheriff Calloway arrived an hour later, a big man with kind eyes and a salt and pepper mustache. He listened to Josiah's account, took notes about the truck Beckett had heard, and walked the property looking for tire tracks and other evidence. Professionals, he confirmed, crouching beside clear tire impressions near the barn. They knew what they were doing, probably had Thunder loaded, and were miles away before dawn. Any chance of getting him back? Calloway's expression was grim. I'll put out alerts to all the auction houses and racing tracks in a 5-state area. But you know how this goes, Josiah. These organized rings usually have buyers lined up before they ever make the grab. As the sheriff drove away, Josiah felt the weight of loss settling on his shoulders. Thunder wasn't just a horse, he was the foundation of Josiah's breeding program, his retirement plan, his daily companion. Without him, the ranch felt empty. I'm sorry, Beckett said quietly, about your horse. Josiah looked at the boy, really looked at him. Despite everything being homeless, hungry, scared, the kid had stayed to give information that might help find Thunder. He could have run the moment he heard the truck, but he'd remained to be a witness. It's not your fault, Josiah said finally, but I appreciate you telling the sheriff what you heard. Beckett nodded, then hefted his backpack. I should probably get going. Where to? The boy's silence was answer enough. You can stay. Josiah found himself saying the words out before he could stop them, just for a few days, until we figure things out. Beckett's eyes widened with something that might have been hope, quickly masked by wariness. I don't need charity, good, because I'm not offering any. Josiah stood, brushing crumbs from his shirt. I've got 23 horses on this ranch, and with Thunder gone, I'm short-handed. You said you were good with animals. Prove it. The transformation in the boy was immediate. His spine straightened, his chin lifted, and for the first time since Josiah had found him, Beckett looked like a kid instead of a refugee. They spent the morning in the pastures, and Josiah had to admit he was impressed. Beckett moved around, the horses with an instinctive understanding that couldn't be taught. He read their body language, respected their space, and somehow managed to coax cooperation from even Dancer, the temperamental quarter-horse mare who'd been giving Josiah grief for months. Where'd you learn to handle horses like that? Josiah asked as they mucked out stalls together. My gad, Beckett said quietly, then immediately looked like he regretted the admission. He teach you to ride too, yeah. The boy's voice was barely audible before he died. All right, Josiah said finally, making a decision that probably made him certifiably insane. We'll do this, but we do it smart, we do it careful, and we do it together. Beckett's smile was the first real one Josiah had seen from him, bright and fierce and full of hope. Their first break came 3 days later through an unexpected source, Dancer, the temperamental mare who had taken such a liking to Beckett. The boy was grooming her when he noticed something unusual. Josiah, he called out, voice tight with excitement. Come look at this. Josiah hurried over to find Beckett examining Dancer's neck with a magnifying glass. He'd borrowed from the first aid kit. "See this?" Beckett pointed to a tiny mark barely visible through the mare's coat. "It's an injection site. Fresh, maybe a week old." Josiah's blood ran cold. They came for her too. But they didn't take her. Why would they inject her and leave her behind? They examined every horse on the property and found 3 more with similar marks, all mares of breeding age, all showing subtle behavioral changes that Josiah had attributed to seasonal shifts. They were calmer, more compliant, less reactive to stimuli. "It's a test," Beckett said with the certainty of someone who'd learned to read danger like weather patterns. They were testing the drug, seeing how it worked on different horses before they used it on Thunder. "Which means they've been watching this place for weeks," Josiah realized. "Planning, preparing. And they'll be back," Beckett added grimly, "for the mares. Once they've moved Thunder safely through their network." That night, they set up surveillance. Equipment, trail cameras borrowed from hunting friends, motion sensors, and a complex alarm system that would alert them to any movement near the barn. If the thieves returned, they'd be ready. But it was Beckett who provided the most crucial insight. Studying maps and property records at the local courthouse, he'd discovered something interesting about the surrounding area. "Look at this," he said, spreading papers across the kitchen table. "Every ranch that's reported horse thefts is within 50 miles of an old mining operation. Abandoned mines with underground tunnels and caves." Josiah studied the pattern. "You think they're using the mines for temporary holding? Makes sense. Remote, hidden, easy to defend. And look here," Beckett pointed to a cluster of properties. "These mines are all owned by the same shell company. Garrison Holdings, Garrison. Like the name you heard that night. Has to be connected." They spent the next day reconnoitering the closest mine site, a defunct copper operation 20 miles north of the ranch. From a ridge overlooking the property, they could see why it would appeal to criminals. The main compound was hidden in a valley, accessible only by a single winding road. Buildings that had once housed mining equipment could easily conceal vehicles and livestock. And there was activity, fresh tire tracks, well-maintained fencing, and the telltale signs of recent construction. "We need to get closer," Beckett said, studying the compound through binoculars. "We need to call the state police," Josiah countered. "With what evidence? Tire tracks and suspicions? They'll send a patrol car to knock on the front door, and by the time they get a warrant, everything will be gone." The boy had a point, but Josiah didn't like where this was heading. "What are you suggesting? Tonight, when it's dark, just a reconnaissance mission, see if Thunder's there, maybe get some photos?" "Absolutely not. It's too dangerous." Beckett's jaw set with stubborn determination. "Then I'll go alone." "Like hell you will. You can't stop me. I've been on my own for weeks. I know how to move without being seen." They stared at each other across the kitchen table, 2 stubborn individuals locked in a battle of wills. Finally, Josiah sighed. "If we do this, and I'm not saying we will, it's purely surveillance. We see what we can see, document it, and get out. No heroics, no rescue attempts." "Agreed. And if things go south, you run. You don't look back. You don't try to help me. You just run." Beckett hesitated, then nodded. "What about you? I'm a grown man who's making a grown man's choice. You're a kid who shouldn't be in this situation at all, but I am in this situation," Beckett said quietly. "And running hasn't solved anything so far." That evening, they prepared like soldiers heading into battle. Dark clothes, emergency supplies, communication devices, and a detailed escape plan. Josiah felt like he was corrupting a child, leading him into danger that could get them both killed. But when he looked at Beckett, focused, determined, more mature than many adults, Josiah knew he realized this wasn't corruption. This was a young man who had already faced the worst life could throw at him and decided to fight back. As they approached the mining compound under cover of darkness, Josiah found himself thinking about family, about the strange bond that had formed between him and this resilient kid. Beckett wasn't his son, wasn't his responsibility, but somehow he'd become both. "You ready?" Beckett whispered as they approached the perimeter fence. Josiah looked at the boy beside him, brave, brilliant, carrying burdens that would break most adults, and felt a surge of pride. That had nothing to do with blood relation. "Let's go find Thunder," he said. The compound was larger than it had appeared from the ridge, with multiple buildings connected by covered walkways. Security was tight but predictable, motion sensor lights, patrol routes that followed a regular pattern, and cameras that covered the obvious approaches but left blind spots for anyone clever enough to exploit them. Beckett moved through the shadows like he'd been born to it, his small size and natural stealth making him nearly invisible. Josiah followed, marveling at the boy's instincts and trying not to think about what kind of life had taught a 12-year-old to move like a ghost. They found the horses in the third building. They checked a converted warehouse that had been fitted with temporary stalls. The smell hit them first, dozens of animals in close quarters, the stress and fear palpable in the air. But it was the sound that broke Josiah's heart, soft whickers and nervous shuffling from horses that should have been peacefully grazing in familiar pastures. There, Beckett breathed, pointing to a stall near the back of the building. Thunder stood with his head hung low, looking nothing like the proud stallion who had ruled Josiah's ranch. The chemical compliance drug had robbed him of his spirit, turning him into a docile shadow of himself. But he was alive, and he was here. "We have to document this," Josiah whispered, pulling out the small camera they'd brought. "Get photos of everything." As they worked their way through the building, the scope of the operation became clear. There were at least 30 horses, all valuable breeding stock, all showing signs of the same chemical docility. Tags on each stall indicated destinations, some bound for overseas buyers, others destined for illegal breeding programs across the country. It was Beckett who noticed the office area attached to the main building. "Records," he said simply. "If we can get their files, we'll have everything the police need." The office was locked, but Beckett produced a set of lock picks from his backpack with the casual competence of someone who'd learned to survive by being resourceful. "Don't ask," he said when he saw Josiah's expression. Inside, they found exactly what they were looking for: computers, filing cabinets, and a wall covered with photographs and documentation of their crimes. The scope was staggering. Hundreds of horses stolen over the past 5 years, buyers from around the world, and profit margins that explained why they were willing to kill to protect their operation. But it was a single file folder that made Beckett go rigid with shock. His father's name was on the tab, and inside were police reports, investigation notes, and photographs of Trooper Rivers' accident. "They killed him," Beckett whispered, his voice breaking. "They really killed him." Josiah pulled the boy close, feeling the tremor that ran through his small frame. "We're going to make them pay for that. For him, for Thunder, for all of it." They were so focused on the files that they almost missed the sound of approaching footsteps. "Almost, someone's coming," Beckett hissed, already moving toward the window they'd used to enter. But it was too late. The office door opened, and the woman from Beckett's description stood silhouetted in the doorway, tall, blonde, professional looking, and holding a gun with the confidence of someone who'd used it before. Well, she said, her voice cultured and cold. "Dr. Voss, wasn't it? I should have realized you'd be more than you seemed." Behind her stood the two men Beckett had described: Garrison with his gray beard and gut, and the younger, muscular one whose name they now knew from the files, Crawford. "Let the boy go," Josiah said, stepping protectively in front of Beckett. "This is between adults." Dr. Voss laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "The boy is the one who's been causing problems. Amazing how much trouble one little witness can create." "You killed his father," Josiah said. "Trooper River was getting too close to the truth. Just like you are now." She gestured with the gun. "Unfortunately, lightning sometimes strikes twice in the same family." But she'd underestimated Beckett. The boy had spent weeks learning to survive, learning to read people and situations, learning when to run and when to fight. And he'd learned from the best teacher possible: loss, fear, and the desperate need to survive. The lights went out. There it was, the pain that lived behind those old green eyes. Josiah had suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed hit him harder than expected. He remembered being 12, remembered thinking the world was permanent and safe. This kid had learned otherwise the hard way. "I'm sorry," Josiah said simply. Beckett nodded, not trusting his voice, and they worked in companionable silence for a while. It wasn't until they broke for lunch that the boy spoke again. The men who took Thunder. He said suddenly, I saw them. Josiah nearly choked on his sandwich. What, last night? I wasn't completely asleep when they came. I stayed real still. Pretended to be unconscious, but I saw them through the stall slats. Why didn't you tell the sheriff? Beckett's jaw tightened. Because I know what happens when kids like me start pointing fingers at adults. Nobody believes us. We're just troublemakers, runaways, liars. The cynicism in that young voice broke Josiah's heart. I'd believe you, would you? Beckett searched his face. Even if what I saw sounded crazy, try me. The boy took a deep breath. There were 3 of them, 2 men and a woman. The woman. She did something to Thunder, some kind of injection. But it wasn't a tranquilizer. After she gave it to him, Thunder got real calm, but not sleepy calm. More like obedient calm. Like he wanted to follow them. Josiah frowned. That doesn't make sense. Thunder's trained. But he's not docile. He wouldn't just walk into a strange trailer with people he didn't know. That's what was weird about it. The injection changed him, made him compliant. And the woman, she kept talking to him in this low voice, giving him commands. Thunder followed everyone like he was hypnotized. What did they look like? The woman was tall, maybe 40, with short blonde hair, professional looking, like a vet or something. One of the men was older, probably 60, with a big gut and a gray beard. The other was younger, maybe 30, dark hair, really muscular. Josiah committed every detail to memory. This wasn't random horse theft, this was something more sophisticated. The injection Beckett described sounded like some kind of chemical. Compliance drug, something that would make a valuable, temperamental stallion easy to transport. There's something else, Beckett continued. I heard them talking. The woman called the older man Garrison, and they mentioned something about a collection and how Thunder would be perfect for the breeding program. A chill ran down Josiah's spine. He'd heard rumors over the years, whispers in the horse community about a black market breeding operation that stole champion horses and disappeared them into an underground network. Most people dismissed it as urban legend. But what if it was real? Beckett, he said carefully, would you be willing to tell this to the sheriff? The boy's face went pale. What if they come back? What if they figure out I saw them? They won't, Josiah said with more confidence than he felt. But this information could be the key to getting Thunder back. Beckett was quiet for a long moment, wrestling with fear and conscience. Finally, he nodded. Okay, but you have to promise me something. What if this goes bad? If they don't believe me, or if those people come looking for me? You won't just turn me over to social services, you'll let me run. The request hit Josiah like a physical blow. This kid had already lost everything once. He was terrified of losing the tiny bit of safety he'd found here. I promise, Josiah said. But it won't come to that. He hoped he was right. Sheriff Calloway returned that afternoon with Detective Martinez from the state police, a sharp-eyed woman with graying temples who specialized in livestock theft. They sat around Josiah's kitchen table while Beckett, nervous but determined, recounted everything he'd witnessed. This matches a pattern we've been tracking, Martinez said when the boy finished. High-value horses disappearing from ranches across 3 states, always professionals, always overnight, and the horses are never seen again. What about the injection? Josiah asked. Probably a modified animal tranquilizer combined with a behavioral suppressant. Makes the animal docile without making them unsteady. Very sophisticated stuff, not something your average horse thief would have access to. Calloway leaned forward. Beckett, you mentioned the name Garrison. Did you hear anything else? A last name? Where they were headed? The boy screwed up his face in concentration. The woman, the one who did the injection, she said something about Facility 12 and the Colorado operation. But I'm not sure if that means anything. Martinez and Calloway exchanged a look that made Josiah's stomach tighten. What is it? He demanded. We've had intelligence about a possible illegal breeding operation in Colorado. Martinez admitted. Remote location, well-funded, connections to overseas buyers, but we've never been able to prove it exists until now. Calloway added grimly, after the officers left, promising to coordinate with federal authorities. Josiah found Beckett in the barn, brushing Dancer with more vigor. than necessary. You did good today, Josiah said. Did I? Beckett's voice was tight with anxiety. Because now I feel like I've painted a target on both our backs. These people were already criminals, son. You just helped law enforcement find them. Beckett set down the brush and turned to face him. You don't understand. My dad, he was a state trooper. He was investigating something like this when he was killed. The words hit Josiah like a punch to the gut. Killed. I thought you said he died. He did die. In what everyone said was a car accident. But the night before, he told my mom he was close to breaking a case involving stolen horses and a drug operation. Said some powerful people were going to be very unhappy with him. And then his brakes failed on a mountain road. Beckett's young face was hard with grief and anger. Funny how that happens sometimes. Josiah sank onto a hay bale, processing this new information. What happened to your mother? Cancer. 6 months after Dad died. Left me with an aunt who decided she didn't want to deal with a difficult kid. Asking too many questions about his father's death. No wonder the boy had trust issues. No wonder he'd been wandering alone, carrying secrets that adults should have been protecting him from instead. Beckett, Josiah said carefully, when you heard those people talking last night, did they mention anything about drugs or operations beyond horse theft? The boy nodded slowly. The woman said something about the product and distribution networks. I thought she meant horses, but it could have been something else. They stared at each other in the growing twilight, both understanding that this was bigger than one stolen horse. Thunder hadn't just been taken by thieves, he'd been swept up in something that might have cost Beckett's father his life. We should call the detective back, Josiah said. No. Beckett's voice was sharp with fear. Not yet. What if there's someone on the inside? What if that's how they always stay one step ahead? It was a chilling thought, but not an impossible one. Corruption could exist anywhere, even in law enforcement. Then what do you suggest? Beckett was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice held a maturity that no 12-year-old should possess. We find Thunder ourselves, and we gather enough evidence that they can't ignore it or cover it up. That's dangerous thinking. Son, living is dangerous, Beckett replied. I learned that when I was 8 years old. That evening, they researched everything they could find about horse theft rings and illegal breeding operations. Josiah used his contacts in the horse community to ask careful questions, while Beckett proved surprisingly adept at internet searches, finding connections and patterns that might have been overlooked. What they discovered was disturbing. Reports of valuable horses disappearing, always with the same hallmarks: professional execution. No witnesses, animals never recovered. And in several cases, when owners had pushed too hard for answers or gotten too close to the truth, they'd suffered accidents or mysterious setbacks that convinced them to stop looking. They're organized, Beckett said, studying printouts spread across the kitchen table. And they have resources, money, connections, people willing to eliminate problems, like your father. Like my father, Beckett confirmed quietly. As they worked late into the night, Josiah found himself impressed by the boy's intelligence and determination. Beckett had a natural investigative instinct, a way of seeing patterns and making connections that reminded Josiah of the best detectives he'd known. But more than that, he saw something else in the kid: a desperate need for justice, not just for Thunder, but for his father, for all the victims of these criminals who had operated with impunity for too long.